He came home from work, tired and ready to relax, only to hear her laughing at his $12 hour job, as if every paycheck he earned was a personal joke. $12 an hour, really? That's all you do? She teased, swirling her wine glass like she owned the world. He tried to smile, tried to laugh it off, but every word cut deeper, and the humiliation didn't end there. She leaned closer, smirking. Maybe one day you'll actually make something of yourself. He nodded silently, the sting of her words sinking in as he watched her leave the room, laughing with friends, oblivious to the quiet anger building inside him. Hours later, as she boasted at the dinner table, he poured himself a glass of water and quietly excused himself. Walking past the apartment lobby, past the unsuspecting doorman, and out into the street, he felt a calm certainty forming. The next morning, she returned with the same arrogant confidence, planning another lesson in superiority. She opened the door, smiling, unaware that her mockery had set the stage for a revelation that would shake her world. He watched quietly as she prepared her coffee, chatting casually about the poor little guy who worked for peanuts, and yet he held the key to her entire universe. Every casual remark, every sly smile, every roll of her eyes was being recorded in his memory, stored for the perfect moment of exposure. And when that moment came, it wouldn't be loud, it wouldn't be angry, but devastatingly calm and precise. She thought she had the power, the upper hand, but she had no idea that the foundation she mocked was actually the empire she depended on. Every glance, every laugh, every gesture would meet the quiet, unshakable authority he had built while she underestimated him. And when she finally realized the truth, there would be no place to hide, no excuses, only the crushing clarity of reality meeting arrogance. He had just returned home from a long, grueling shift, his arms sore, his mind heavy with the endless responsibilities of a job that barely paid the bills. It was the kind of day where exhaustion weighs you down, where every muscle aches, and all you want is a quiet moment, some peace, and maybe a bite of dinner without commentary or judgment. But the moment he opened the door, he realized that peace would not be granted tonight. There she was, standing in the middle of the living room, glass of wine in hand, leaning slightly against the counter. Her posture was casual but deliberate, her smirk sharp, eyes gleaming with amusement. And then he heard the words, clear as the ringing of a bell, words that made his heart sink. $12 an hour. Really? That's all you make? The laugh that followed wasn't just hers. It was joined by her friends, echoing in the room, bouncing off the walls, making him feel smaller with every syllable. He tried to smile, to make it seem like he wasn't hurt, but the sting of humiliation crept through him like ice in his veins. Everyone starts somewhere, he muttered, forcing a calm that didn't exist. She leaned closer, a subtle tilt of the head, and said, maybe one day you'll actually do something worthwhile, but for now, this is all I get. Her eyes danced with a cruel precision, every motion, every word a careful strike. He did not answer immediately, he simply observed. Every gesture, every smirk, every laugh, it was all being recorded in his mind. He catalogued it for the moment when the tables would turn. Hours passed. Every sentence she uttered was a reminder of the power she believed she held. She spoke of his salary, of his position, of his lack of ambition. She painted a picture in front of friends and colleagues of a man small in ambition and scope, a man who could be dismissed, mocked, and belittled without consequence. And yet, behind his calm exterior, a storm of strategy and patience was brewing. He excused himself at one point, claiming he needed a drink of water. The hallway outside was quiet, and he allowed himself to breathe, to think, to plan. Every step back into the room, every careful observation of her expression, every glance at her friends, it was all part of the preparation. The moment for revelation would be precise, measured, and devastating, but not in the way she expected. It would not be loud, it would not be angry, it would be deliberate. He had been working silently, building quietly, accumulating not just savings but influence, property, investments, everything she dismissed in her casual arrogance. Every floor, every unit, every detail of the building she mocked, she assumed irrelevant, belonged to him. Every brick, every corner, every silent achievement, she had ignored them all. And now, she believed herself untouchable. She had no idea that the foundation she was standing on had been entirely laid by the man she laughed at. Finally, the night arrived, when everything would change. He did not enter with a shout. He did not demand attention. He walked in quietly, as if part of the background, but each step was deliberate. She continued her casual mockery, laughing at the supposed inadequacy of his work, rolling her eyes, making every action she took a display of superiority. But every step he took toward revelation tightened the tension. Every subtle pause, every controlled gesture, made her friends lean forward, unconsciously sensing that the scene was about to shift dramatically. He finally spoke, not raising his voice, not pointing or gesturing dramatically, but with calm authority that carried the weight of years of unnoticed effort. Everything you laughed at, everything you dismissed, belongs to me. The room froze. Her smirk faltered. A flicker of disbelief crossed her eyes. She had assumed power, but she had never expected quiet authority to reveal itself like this. Her friends gasped. Whispers halted mid-sentence. She looked at him, stunned, realizing that the man she had mocked for so long was in fact the one who controlled the very reality she thought she dominated. He did not need to shout. He did not need to gesticulate. The calm revelation was more powerful than any drama, more cutting than any insult she had thrown. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Her friends, the witnesses to her assumed superiority, were all frozen. The laughter that had once filled the room vanished entirely. She understood, in that instant, that the very foundation she had belittled, the $12-hour man she thought beneath her, had been quietly constructing the empire she relied on without ever realizing it. He allowed the weight of the moment to settle. He did not gloat. He did not scold. He simply stood, composed, letting the truth sink in fully. Every glance, every realization, every silent acknowledgement added to the transformation. The power of patience, observation, and quiet diligence had revealed itself completely. She could mock no longer. She could argue no longer. She had no ground to stand on. Then, slowly, he turned and walked away, leaving her stunned, leaving her friends speechless, leaving a silence in the room more powerful than any argument could ever have been. He carried nothing except the quiet authority of a man who had been underestimated and had waited for the perfect moment to reveal the truth. The entire room had witnessed the shift, and no words could undo the impact of that calm, precise revelation. Every floor, every unit, every corner of the building now belonged unmistakably to him. She had depended on it, mocked it, ignored it, but it was his. Every casual dismissal she had thrown in his direction returned to her as the stark clarity of reality. He had been underestimated, and now, that underestimation had transformed into undeniable respect, shock, and the quiet but absolute authority of ownership. The morning after the revelation, the apartment was silent. Even the usual creaks and groans of the old floors seemed subdued, as if the building itself had paused to reflect on the events of the night. He woke early, before the sun had fully risen, the weight of what had happened still heavy in his chest. The laughter, the mocking, the disbelief he saw in her face and in the faces of her friends. The images were vivid, burned into his memory like embers of a fire that refused to die. He made himself coffee, black, as he always did when he needed clarity, and sat near the window. The city outside was waking up. Cars passed by, people hurried to work, unaware that one quiet man had just reshaped the dynamics of his own life. He thought about her words, her laughter, the casual way she had assumed superiority, assuming he was powerless, assuming he had nothing but a modest income. But he had waited, he had watched, calculated, and built quietly, and now the power was his to reveal. By mid-morning, she came down, expecting a typical routine. Breakfast, small talk, perhaps another jab disguised as teasing. Her casual arrogance was on full display, and she laughed lightly at what she thought were reminders of his humble position. He let her speak. Every word, every glance, every gesture was stored carefully. He did not interrupt. He did not respond immediately. He was patient, biding his time, letting the tension build. Finally, he spoke. "You enjoy your jokes, don't you?" His voice was calm, almost neutral, but carried a weight that immediately drew her attention. She paused, mid-laugh, and looked at him. "What do you mean?" she asked, still smiling but slightly uncertain. "I mean the jokes about my $12-hour job, the casual way you belittled my work, the assumption that I had nothing, that I contributed nothing to our lives," he said slowly, deliberately. "Did you know that the building you live in, the apartment, every floor, every unit, it's mine?" Her smile faltered. She blinked. Her eyes widened in a mixture of disbelief and shock. The casual, arrogant posture she had carried all morning started to crumble. What do you mean?" she whispered. He placed his coffee cup on the counter and walked toward her calmly, letting the quiet authority in his stride speak volumes. "Every unit, every lease, every part of this building belongs to me. I own it. I have been funding everything quietly, behind the scenes, while you mocked my salary and my work. Do you understand what that means? Her friends gasped. The ones who had been laughing moments before now stood frozen, unable to process the sudden reversal of power. The subtle tension in the room was almost suffocating. Every glance at him now carried the weight of realization. He had been underestimated, dismissed, mocked. But now the truth had emerged, and it was indisputable. She stepped back slightly, her eyes searching his for some hint that he was joking, that this was some trick, some clever twist of words. But he was calm, composed, unwavering. "This isn't a joke," he said softly, letting each word sink into her consciousness. All this time, every casual laugh, every jab, it was directed at someone who quietly built the world you assumed you owned. And now you know. Her voice trembled slightly. I don't understand. How did you?" He raised a hand, stopping her mid-question. "It doesn't matter how. What matters is that you understand now. Everything you ridiculed, everything you belittled, belongs to me, and your assumptions about my life, my work, my worth, they were entirely wrong." She was silent, staring at him, processing the information. The laughter that had once echoed through the apartment was gone. Her confidence, her sense of superiority, had evaporated in an instant. She was seeing the man she had underestimated clearly for the first time, and it shocked her more than any confrontation could. He continued, calm and deliberate. "You mocked my $12-hour job. You assumed I had nothing to offer. But what you never realized is that patience, discretion, and careful planning can wield more power than arrogance ever could." Her hands shook slightly as she adjusted her posture. I didn't mean," she began, but he shook his head. "You did," he said firmly, but without anger. "Whether you meant it or not, the impact was the same. Now you understand." The room remained quiet, the air thick with tension and disbelief. His friends, her friends, everyone present, felt the shift. The tables had turned. The dynamic was no longer in her favor. She had assumed control, dominance, superiority, but it had been an illusion, and now reality was undeniable. He paused, letting the moment settle, letting every eye in the room understand what had been achieved quietly over months, even years. "I am not angry. I am not seeking revenge. I am merely stating facts. You mocked me. You underestimated me. But the foundation of everything you enjoy, everything you take for granted, has been built by me." She staggered back slightly, unable to speak. Her mind raced, trying to find excuses, to reconcile pride with the undeniable reality. But no words could undo the calm certainty he projected, the deliberate authority he had quietly maintained. Finally, he turned slightly, gesturing to the building's documents on the counter. "These papers, the leases, the accounts, everything you laughed at or ignored, it's mine. Every part of this building, every unit, every corner, every detail, belongs to me. And now you see what your mockery was aimed at." She swallowed, her voice barely audible. I can't believe." "Believe it or not," he said softly, "the truth doesn't depend on belief. It exists whether you acknowledge it or not. And now, the joke is on the one who assumed the world was theirs to mock." The room was silent. The tension was palpable. The transformation was complete. The woman who had mocked him for hours, the friends who had laughed, the world they believed under their control, they now witnessed the quiet, undeniable power of someone they had underestimated. He stood, calm, collected, the perfect contrast to the chaos and disbelief around him. "I am not asking for your recognition. I am merely showing you reality, and the reality is that I am in control, even if you never thought to see it." Her eyes darted between him, the papers, the room, and the silent witnesses. She had believed mockery and assumptions were power, but she learned, finally, that true power was quiet, deliberate, and patient. And in that quiet, cinematic moment, he didn't gloat, he didn't raise his voice. He simply let the revelation speak for itself. The $12-hour worker had always been more than she could see. The man she mocked quietly owned the world she assumed she dominated. The morning after the revelation, the apartment felt unusually quiet. The laughter, the smirks, the casual mockery from the night before were gone, replaced by a lingering weight that hung in the air. He stood by the window, arms crossed, looking out at the city streets below. Cars moved, people walked by, oblivious to the emotional storm that had reshaped the dynamics of his life. He had been underestimated for so long, mocked for hours, her friends joining in subtle digs at his salary, his work, his effort, and yet none of them knew the reality hidden beneath his quiet exterior. He had listened, observed, and waited for the perfect moment to reveal the truth. And he had done so. Every floor, every unit, every document, every lease of the building she had belittled was quietly his. Even now, he felt no rush to gloat. This wasn't about revenge. It was about observation, about letting reality speak louder than words or anger ever could. He knew the impact of what she had just realized would ripple through her mind, her pride, and the pride of all who had witnessed her mockery. She hadn't slept well, of course. He could sense it even before she entered the cafe where they had agreed to meet. Her steps were measured, her posture still composed but slightly tense, a subtle hint of apprehension betraying the confident mask she wore. She had come expecting confrontation, perhaps pleading, perhaps guilt. But what she faced was calm, collected authority. He sat across from her, hands lightly resting on the table, calm, composed, and unwavering. "Do you understand what happened last night?" he asked quietly. His tone was neither angry nor accusatory, but deliberate, precise, and authoritative. She hesitated. I think so." He leaned back slightly, studying her, watching her carefully. "When you mocked my $12-hour job, when you assumed I was insignificant, when you laughed at me in front of everyone, you didn't know what you were stepping into. You assumed power. You assumed superiority. You assumed that appearances defined reality. But they don't. You have seen the truth now." Her lips pressed together. She tried to speak, but the words didn't come immediately. She realized that his calm composure carried more authority than all the mockery and superiority she had demonstrated. Her friend's whispers from last night, her confidence, her arrogance, it was all irrelevant against quiet, undeniable power. "You thought you could belittle me," he continued, "without consequences. You believed I was beneath you, incapable of influence or control. Yet every building, every unit, every document you ignored or mocked was mine. And now you understand that your perception of power was false." The subtle shift in her expression was evident. Shock replaced arrogance. Confusion replaced casual mockery. She had assumed the upper hand, but the tables had turned. And yet, he did not raise his voice. He did not shout. He allowed the calmness of his demeanor to amplify the revelation. The silence that followed carried more weight than any argument could have. "I didn't ask for your recognition," he said softly. "I didn't come to humiliate you. I am merely showing you reality. You mocked what you didn't understand, and now you must reconcile your assumptions with the truth." Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her coffee cup, her gaze flickering between him and the documents he had left on the counter. Tangible proof of ownership, authority, and silent accomplishment. Every step, every moment of quiet patience he had exercised was now laid bare in front of her. She spoke finally, her voice soft, almost hesitant. I didn't know." "You did not see," he replied. "You assumed, you mocked, you underestimated, and that was your error." The tension in the room was palpable, a cinematic pause where nothing moved except the realization settling into her mind. She had always believed she controlled the narrative, that her mockery, her laughter, her arrogance gave her the upper hand. But she had not accounted for patience, quiet strength, and years of unnoticed effort building beneath the surface. He took a slow breath. "Understand this. Appearances can deceive, loudness does not equal power, and underestimation can be fatal. You learned this the hard way." Her eyes widened, absorbing the weight of his words. She looked at him, and for the first time there was hesitation, vulnerability. She had assumed he would plead, argue, react with anger, or beg for approval. But none of that happened. His calm, deliberate composure rendered all her previous assumptions irrelevant. She swallowed, her voice trembling slightly. I never realized. "That is why you must observe before you judge," he said, "and understand before you mock." The moment stretched. The room seemed to contract, the audience of her friends and his own family echoing in memory, every whisper and glance from last night amplifying the gravity of the revelation. She was left with nothing but quiet acknowledgement, the stark clarity of a lesson she could neither deflect nor ignore. Finally, he spoke again, calmly, without emotion. "I am not angry. I am not seeking revenge. I am merely presenting the truth. You can respond however you choose, but this is the reality." She sat silently, absorbing the enormity of the situation. Her arrogance was gone, replaced with reflection, realization, and the faintest hint of regret. The lesson had been delivered without theatrics, without shouting, and without malice. And as he stood to leave, the impact of his quiet authority settled like a shadow in the room. Every casual laugh, every mocked word, every assumption of power, had been countered by the calm, deliberate revelation of true authority. He had been underestimated, dismissed, and mocked, yet he had controlled the outcome from the shadows. He walked out of the apartment, leaving behind stunned silence. She, for the first time, understood the quiet power of patience, planning, and composure. The $12-hour worker she had laughed at was the same man who quietly owned the foundation she depended on. And in that revelation, the balance had shifted forever. The morning sunlight filtered softly through the blinds, casting a gentle glow across the apartment. He sat quietly at the kitchen table, the steam from his coffee curling upward, reflecting the calm clarity he had finally achieved. She entered, tentative, her posture slightly tense, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. The arrogance she had displayed before was gone, replaced by a subtle awareness of the reality she had ignored. He looked at her steadily, calm and composed. "You mocked my work, my salary, my effort," he said softly, "but everything you dismissed, everything you assumed insignificant, belongs to me. The building, every floor, every detail, you underestimated me." Her lips pressed together, absorbing the weight of his words. For the first time, she realized the full extent of her arrogance. She had assumed superiority, thinking mockery gave her power, but she faced a truth she could not escape. I didn't understand," she whispered, voice trembling slightly. "I misjudged you." He nodded. "Recognition is the first step, but acknowledgement without respect is meaningless. You must understand boundaries, responsibility, and the consequences of assumptions." Silence followed, heavy yet not tense. The apartment, once a place of mockery and derision, now held a quiet understanding. The dynamic had shifted. Respect had replaced arrogance. Realization had replaced mockery. He continued calmly. "I am not angry. I am not seeking revenge. I am only stating facts. You can react however you choose, but this is reality. You cannot undo what has been built quietly over time." She looked down, reflective, her hands clasped in her lap. The lesson was clear. Appearances deceive, casual judgment has consequences, and patience and diligence build authority that cannot be mocked. He rose slowly, moving to the window, letting the morning light illuminate his composed figure. She remained seated, silent, contemplating the quiet power she had overlooked. The room held the calm of finality, an understanding that respect, patience, and observation are stronger than arrogance or fleeting mockery. In that quiet, cinematic moment, the balance had shifted permanently. No words or confrontation were necessary. The $12-hour worker she had ridiculed quietly owned the foundation she depended on, and he had asserted not only control over reality, but the undeniable authority of composure and patience. He stepped out into the evening, the city lights casting long shadows along the sidewalks. The apartment behind him was quiet, the echoes of the previous confrontation lingering like ghosts in every corner. She had mocked him, belittled him, assumed he had nothing, but now she had seen the truth. The $12 sour man she ridiculed quietly owned the foundation she depended on. He walked slowly, each step measured, deliberate, not out of anger, not out of spite, but out of clarity. Every glance, every smirk she had thrown in his direction was now met with calm authority. The laughter that had once filled the apartment was replaced with silence, the realization of her error settling heavily in her mind. He paused at the street corner, breathing in the cool night air. For the first time, he felt freedom, not the freedom to mock, not the freedom to retaliate, but the freedom of dignity preserved. She had made her choices, but he had made his. Patience, composure, and quiet strength would carry him forward. The city moved on around him, unaware of the lessons delivered quietly in a single living room. But he knew. He had demonstrated that underestimation is dangerous, arrogance is fragile, and respect cannot be demanded. It must be acknowledged. He continued walking, shadows stretching behind him, aware that this ending was not about revenge or display, but about quiet triumph. He had walked away from mockery, from misunderstanding, and from a partner who failed to see his true worth. And as the lights of the city reflected in the pavement ahead, he understood that the greatest victories are often silent. The moment was his, complete in its simplicity, and he stepped forward into a life defined not by others' perceptions, but by his own unshakable self-respect.